much meaning for us. So if you have your Bibles, just go ahead and turn to John 8, verse 12, and we're going to read what Jesus says about himself. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees challenged him. Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. We're going to go ahead and pause there. And the reason we're going to pause there is because that is all John says about, or Jesus says about, I am the light of the world until chapter 9. It's really interesting. He takes this big pause and then gets into a debate with the Pharisees like we saw right there in verse 13. And that takes place for the rest of chapter 8, all the way up to verse 58. And then we have a story of Jesus healing a blind man. And when he heals the blind man, he does this really bizarre thing where he spits in the dirt, makes mud, puts it on his eyes, and tells him to go wash in a pool. And then he says again, I am the light of the world. So those two stories are connected. You remember we talked about last week, right? Or a couple weeks ago about reading the Bible that we want to take big chunks. Well, this story, this one little story is a massive chunk that not only goes all the way through to chapter 9 and even into chapter 10, but it starts all the way back in chapter 7. And now you guys are probably thinking to yourselves, are we really going to read 4 chapters of the Bible this morning? No, that would be a lot, but don't worry, it's still a lot. But I think if we go bigger, like we said, right, take large chunks, we're going to see what's going on. Because the truth is that story, the healing of the blind man, is the example. It is the demonstration of all of the things that have taken place from chapter 7 and chapter 8. So what we're going to do is kind of look back a little bit at chapter 7. Let's go ahead and look at verse 1 really quickly. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Jerusalem because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brother said to him, leave Galilee and go to Judea, so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world, because even his brothers didn't believe in him. Therefore Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I'm not going up to this festival, because my time has not yet fully come. After he said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, where is he? Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, he is a good man. Others replied, no, he deceives the people. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the religious leaders. That sets up the whole story. And one of the things that sets it up is this thing called the Feast of Tabernacles. Some of the things that Jesus says in there about water, which we're going to see in just a minute, and what he says about himself being the light of the world, it actually all has to do with this Jewish celebration, the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, for John's readers, that just made total sense. They didn't need an explanation of what this thing was. But for us, we go, okay, tabernacles, what is that? I thought that was related to the desert, and it is. So what is the Feast of Tabernacles? We're going to break this down in a couple of parts. The Feast of Tabernacles is a celebration during the fall, right? So it's in early fall where you're getting the harvest, but it's still warm. So it's a celebration of the season and the harvest, but it's also tied to the Israelites' experience in the desert after the Exodus, right? We might recall Moses led the people out of Egypt and then they went into the desert. That whole desert experience is tied into this festival. That is, that festival was remembering that particular event. And so the reason it's called Festival of Tabernacles or Feast of Tabernacles is because everybody would build these little booths. Let's go ahead and show that picture of the booths real quick. And all throughout Jerusalem, the streets, do we have the picture? There it is. So all throughout Israel, families would set up these booths, or Jerusalem, they would set up these booths as part of the celebration. And what it was doing is calling back to the time when they were wandering through the desert, and then they'd have to set up these little temporary shelters so that they could pack it up again and then keep wandering through the desert. So they would line these up throughout the streets. And the reason I want to paint that picture is because of what's going on here in John chapter 7. There's a lot of interesting things that are taking place before this festival. Jesus' brothers are going to go because it's a big deal. Everybody's going to be celebrating. But Jesus doesn't want to go. And he doesn't want to go because he knows in Jerusalem the religious leaders are going to try to kill him. And it's not time for him to die yet. So his brothers, being the good brothers that they are, tease him. They're making fun of him. They mock him. And they say, hey, why don't you go to the festival? I mean, everybody's going to be there. You've been walking around doing miracles. You've been preaching, telling everybody what's what. Why don't you go down there, show yourself, because nobody wants to do these things in secret, right? They don't believe him. They think Jesus is full of it. So Jesus replies, I'm not going. I'm not going to do this now. You go ahead. And then for some reason, and we don't know why, Jesus changes his mind. His brothers leave, and then he says, all right, I guess I'm going to go. And he decides to go, knowing everything that he just said. Now, that should look strange to us, right? We go, wait a second, Jesus, you just said you can't go because you're going to die, right? They want to kill you, but it's not time for you to die on the cross yet. But then you say, I guess I'll go. What's happening? The answer, we don't know. We don't know if it's his humanity, right? Remember, Jesus is fully God, fully man, and he wants to be part of the celebration. We don't know if he has some other plan in mind and he decides to go. But the point is John is leaving us with this big mystery and this big tension. Because as we see the story unfold, Jesus is going to come head to head with the Pharisees. And that debate escalates with Jesus telling them, you're the children of the devil. And the Pharisees saying, you don't even have an earthly father. Comes to that big old head. So we're left with this sense of something's weird, something's wrong, and it's not right. Well, Jesus does indeed go to the festival. And when Jesus arrives at the festival, this is the first day, right? So 7 days of this festival, he arrives, and there's all these booths around. So you got to imagine the scene. Everybody's in these booths. He's kind of walking around the village. I just imagine him like in his cloak with a hood on, like some sort of clandestine Messiah mission or something like that. But as he's walking around in secret, kind of keeping his head down on the run, on the lamb, as it were, and he's hearing people in the booths whispering like, who is this Jesus guy? Is he the Messiah? Is he a fraud? Oh no, the Messiah doesn't come from Galilee, he comes from Bethlehem. This guy's got to be a fraud. And all of these whispering and murmurs going on as he's walking around in secret during this festival. We're going to fast forward to day 3 of the festival. And at day 3 of the festival, Jesus decides he's going to teach. And that's kind of important for us because Jesus didn't all of a sudden decide, you know what, I'm going to go, show up day 1, and just start speaking in front of everybody. He waited till the 3rd day of this festival. So he's kind of been hiding in secret. Day 3, he goes in and starts teaching in the temple. And this is what the gospel says in verse 14. Not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. The Jews there were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? Jesus answered, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. That line is so important because the reality is all of the debate, all the way through to chapter 10, is over that question. Where did Jesus come from? Where does Jesus get his authority? Where did Jesus get his education? Where did Jesus get this ability to do miracles? Where did Jesus get a witness? Who is his father? All of these questions are about where Jesus comes from. So, Jesus teaches. The crowds are divided. Some love what he says, some don't. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they want to kill him. And that cycle repeats over and over again. And then we get to this great moment that leads into our verse. It is the last day of the ceremony. John actually uses the words, it was the last and the greatest day of the feast. And that's because it is a huge, raucous celebration. I mean, everybody is clapping and cheering. They're singing, there's songs, there's instruments playing, all kinds of things. So it was a massive celebration to culminate the work that God had done in the desert. And one of those things was the water ceremony. And this matters. I promise you it matters for what happens to the blind man. During the water ceremony, the priest would go down, it's just outside the temple courts, to a pool, the pool of Siloam. And when he went down to that pool, he would take a golden cup, And he'd bring that golden cup with him up to an altar. And as he's walking this golden cup up to the altar, people are singing, they're praising, they're just worshiping God like crazy. And when he would bring that cup up to the altar, to the temple courts, they would sing this phrase from Isaiah 12. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. What does that mean? That means they recognize this water is a symbol. It symbolizes not only the water that God provided in the desert for them so that they wouldn't die, that physical type of stuff, but also that water symbolizing cleansing, symbolizing washing, was a way of salvation. And that this provision was also messianic hope. It wasn't just about what God did in the past, but they were looking for a day to come when nobody would thirst again. It's the messianic hope. And so that's what these symbols mean. It was, and then they even say this, listen to this. Isaiah 12:5, sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. The Holy One is God's Messiah. It's his chosen. So while they're singing this phrase from Isaiah 12, this is the rest of that verse and that chapter, and they're singing looking for this messianic hope that the Holy One would be present and among them. John goes on to say this in verse 37. So the water's poured out there, and you just imagine all this, right? They're singing, they're celebrating, there's water, they're saying, great is the Holy One, God's salvation and all of it, and then Jesus makes this claim. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. But to that time the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not been glorified. So as this whole celebration is taking place, they're singing these scriptures about the Messiah, God's salvation. Jesus basically stands up in front of all of this crowd and says, hey, all of this stuff, yeah, it's me. I'm right here. Check it out. You can almost hear that like 1990s tire screech effect, and everybody's heads pausing and turning to look at Jesus. And of course, that gets the attention of the crowd. Per the usual, the crowd is divided. Some listen. They say, well, he's got to be a prophet if he's going to speak like that. Others say, this man's crazy. He's not. He's a liar. He's a fraud. Then, of course, the religious leaders, they want to take him and they want to kill him. And so the debate goes on. But one of the fascinating things about this pool is it's called the Pool of Siloam, which also means sent one. It means the sent. Remember, the question is about Jesus' origin. When he's talking about salvation, when he's talking about the messianic hope, that pool, the sent one, is again a reference to the Messiah. And that name is going to matter in just a few minutes. So then it continues. And the next bold claim that Jesus makes about himself is the one that we just read. I am the light of the world. But why is that so profound? And why does it matter in this context? At the last evening of the festival, while the water was being poured, there was another great celebration that was taking place. Let's show the picture. In the temple courts were 4 massive pillars. They're huge pillars. And at the top of each pillar fanned out 4 massive bowls. So a total of like 16 huge bowls that would be filled with oil, and they would be lit on fire so that the whole temple court was lit up. But not only was the whole temple court lit up by this, while the celebration and the praise and the worship was taking place, the men in Israel would have their candles and their lights in their hands as they were dancing around, celebrating and praising God. So as this festival continues, it's in this moment, right, the big light that Jesus makes this claim, I am the light of the world, in this joyous celebration. And what all of these lights are meant to symbolize, it's not just a thing they did because they liked warm fire candlelight or are going to toast s'mores after all of this. They did this because, you remember, this is going back to the Exodus. How did God lead his people through the darkness of the desert? It was through the pillar of fire. And that pillar of fire that led the people through the darkness was not just fire in and of itself. It was the very presence of God. So when Jesus, in all of this ceremony and all of the symbolism, stands up and says this in verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Again, you can hear the sound effect. because now everybody knows what he's talking about. They know for sure, not only are you saying you're the Messiah, because we're looking for the day when we have the light of life and we don't need a sun anymore because we're in the light of God's presence. But that pillar of fire was God's presence. You're saying that you are here and your presence is here. He's equating himself to God. And because he is God, he's here to bring light to all mankind. Needless to say, we can see the Pharisees were not real happy with this. The religious leaders did not like that. And I will say, look, a little bit, just hear me out till the end of this. In their defense, they were looking with their eyes, which is going to be the theme of chapter 9. They were looking with their human eyes. And when you look at Jesus with human eyes, he's a crazy man. And the reason he's a crazy man is because no sane person walks around claiming to be God, unless they're God. But if you look at him through human lenses, human eyes, he doesn't look that way. He was just some guy from Galilee, walked around with some 12 losers all around the desert. You think I'm kidding? Like, this is truly the perspective that everybody would have with these guys. We look at them as reverend apostles, of course, but they didn't look at him this way. So they go to battle, and the debate continues. It rages on, and they get into all kinds of things like, how are you testifying to yourself? Where's your witness? Jesus says, well, the Father is my witness. What do you mean the Father is your witness? You don't have a dad. Wink, wink. Taking little digs at him. He's like, you don't have fathers either. Abraham is our father. You're not the children of Abraham. You're the children of the devil. Back and forth, right, all the time. And it ends in verse 58, and I love the end of this debate line because as they're going back and forth, they ask him, are you saying you're greater than Abraham? And Jesus says, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. Definitively saying, you have no idea who I am. I come from heaven, and I am God. That is a hearkening back to the burning bush when God revealed himself to Moses with those words, I am who I am. Jesus is putting himself in the position of father of even Abraham. How do we know he was doing something so big? Because the Pharisees picked up stones. They picked up stones and rocks and they were just about to kill him right there because it was blasphemy through their human eyes. What's fascinating about this story is that through all this debate, through this claim of the light of the world and the tabernacle and all this stuff that we see here, John never gives us any explanation of what this actually means until chapter 9, when we see the healing of the blind man. So let's look at chapter 9. We're going to read from verse 1 to verse 6. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The theme of seeing things clearly, right? Light and darkness is the major theme of the rest of this chapter. Do the disciples see clearly? They don't. They don't understand. They don't understand human ailments as simply human ailments and the effect of sin, generally speaking. They looked at this sin, like everybody else would, as a judgment from God because somebody sinned greatly. So Jesus opens their eyes. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. See the origin? Of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work, but while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. There it is, tying those two together. After saying this, he spit in the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. So what John does now is flip the script of everything that these guys knew. They thought they had a handle on what holiness was. They thought they had a handle on what good before God meant. And Jesus comes in and he says, that's absolutely not the truth. And I am the light of the world, and I'm going to show you what the truth really is. It wasn't this man, nor was it his parents. In fact, what I'm about to do is illuminate even more so that you can see the mighty works of God. And that's exactly what he does. These verses aren't up. We'll just summarize it. So what Jesus does is that weird thing. He spits in the mud. All right, he makes this little mud cake thing, puts it on the guy's eyes, and just call it what it is. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. But then he tells him to go wash his eyes in the pool. Guess what the pool was? The pool of Siloam. That's where Jesus tells him to go wash his eyes. Why did we spend so much time up front talking about the pool of Siloam and how it meant the sent one and how it referenced God's salvation and also the messianic hope? Because it's exactly where Jesus chooses to display the works of God in this story. Jesus and John are yet again confirming that the healing power that Jesus is about to display is coming from where he was sent, and that he is in fact the sent one from God. What a beautiful picture. And so then the story goes on. You would think it would end there. But John does this thing. I just absolutely love it. But we're going to go ahead and fast forward to verse 26. Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" Let me preface this just a little bit more. So the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they hear word that this guy was healed. And instead of like being happy that God did something, they're angry. They're upset. Why would God heal this man? They even call him a sinner, flat out. Why would God heal a sinner? Obviously because you guys don't understand. So what they do is they drag this poor guy into court to try to figure out what happened. Then they kick him out because he outwitted them. So he goes out. They call in his parents. They try to figure out from them. His parents are like, "Hey, look, he was blind, but I have no idea what happened," because they were afraid of the religious leaders. So then they call this poor guy who had just been healed, who might want to go celebrate and like maybe go look at a rose that he's never seen before. And instead, they drag him back in for the second interrogation. And that's where we find ourselves here in verse 26. Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" The blind man answered, "I have told you already, and did you not listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" I love it. This blind man, he's great. Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." There's the question again. The blind man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. I love this story. This is one of the typical devices that our gospel writers will use, where the person you don't expect to know, to understand, or to give the lesson is the one that teaches the lesson. Everything that Jesus does as light of the world is because he is the Son of God. He is God. He was sent by the Father to do the Father's will. And part of that will is to illuminate the world to the truth of who he is and the salvation of God. I love this line. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of a man opening the eyes of one born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Why is this important? The Jesus that we preach, the Jesus that we talk about, he's not just some religious guy that walked around the desert 2,000 years ago. And we know this. He's God in flesh. He's God incarnate. And he came to reveal the truth. And this image that he gives us is that he is here in the darkness to lead people out of the wilderness and into his glorious light. Remember, when Jesus uses this phrase, let's go back to it really quickly. He says something interesting here. "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This is more than just God leading Israel through the desert and to brighten the darkened room. This is about God leading you into truth. This is about God leading you into salvation. This is about God leading you into an abundant life. The word here isn't biology. The word here is Zoe. And yes, that means existence, but it means quality. It means a good life. Like John 10:10 says, "I have come to give life and give it to the fullest," or abundantly. Jesus is here to give us a quality life that's found only in him. And only in Jesus, when we follow that light of the world, will he walk us through that desert. Every one of us in this room is either in or has been in a desert period. Some of us might be in the darkness because we don't believe in Jesus. Some of us might be in darkness because we are the people of God, but like Israel, we're finding ourselves in the darkened night desert. Let's go to black. Have you ever been here? Have you ever been to a place of darkness? Place of despair. You've been asking and you've been pleading with God, and you're asking him to meet you in the darkness. Maybe you have that sense of wandering in the desert, purposeless, meaningless. God, what do you have for me? So what is it? What's keeping you in this place of the nighttime desert? Some of us have received Jesus as Savior, but things still look dim. They might look faint. You might be saying, Jesus, I believe in you. I do believe in you, but how come I'm not through the desert yet? How come I can't see you? Look at the floor real quick. How dark is the shadow beneath your feet? Why am I still in this place of the nighttime desert? And let me say this. You might believe, but Jesus doesn't ask for belief. He asks for obedience. He says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me. Not says, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. Yeah, I'll raise my hand. I'm a Christian. It's the person who follows and obeys Jesus, and then it gets brighter. When you pray to him daily and spend time with him, it gets brighter. The presence of God, that pillar of fire was the presence of God itself. When you worship him daily, it gets brighter. When you read his word daily and you understand the truth that illuminates your life, it gets brighter. When you solidify yourself in true community that sharpens you and encourages you and bears your burden with each other, it gets brighter. Listen to this. When you get over yourself and surrender to the leading of the Holy Spirit, it gets brighter. When you give up your sin, your anger, your envy, your pride, your addictions, it gets brighter. When you do the things of the kingdom like evangelism and healing the sick and take the light of the world into the kingdom of darkness, it gets brighter. It's Jesus that is the light of the world. And it's when you choose to obey and follow the light of the world that you get through the desert darkness. That's when it happens. And it's not so we feel good. It's not so we get the goosebumps. That's not what it is. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, and we're going to do these things that the Father has us to do. That's the point, right? You know I don't like those like super inspirational things. And no, look, God's calling us to go do the stuff of the kingdom. That's what makes the world brighter. That's what shines life. That's what shines truth. Earlier this week, I was in Starbucks, and I met a guy. And this guy, like me, loves to talk. And so I got nothing done. Well, maybe that's not true. I got a good sermon illustration out of it, as you'll see. And so he's sharing with me his story, and then he asked me my story. Like, so how did you go from Los Angeles out to North Carolina? And I was like, well, that's a funny story. And I give him the short version, and then he asks a question. And I give him the short version, and then he asks a question. Then he says, how did you know you want to be a pastor? And I went, okay, this is not going to be a short story anymore. Like, I don't know how to do this. So I leveled with him. I'm like, you got like a half hour, right? Because this is a long story. So I went back to the very beginning when I was 9 years old. And I was at Anaheim Vineyard, and a lady told my mom that she had a dream about me, preaching to people coming to faith, and all that kind of stuff. And I just believed it since I was 9 years old. And so then, this is not a joke. Every step of my life has been towards that call. College, right? Even my music degree, going into teaching so I could go through seminary, all of it. It's all been for that. So then he asked the question, like, well, how did you get here to North Carolina? Like, if you were out there pastoring at a church, why are you out here? And I'm like, oh my gosh, you got another half hour? Like, how, God, we got to wrap this up. I will tell you the short version of the story and what I told him. And I said that I got hired full-time at a church, and while I was there, we were going through like just a lot of junk, all right? And if you guys want to hear more about it, I'd love to tell you at some point, but for time's sake, it got so bad that there was a point during that ministry time where I said, God, if this is what church is like, I don't want any part of it. I'm done with this. I'll go back to teaching where I was praying for students, ministering to students every single day instead of this nonsense. And he closed every teaching door, even the ones that I was qualified for. He closed them, every single one. I told Aurora one Sunday, I'd love to just, after this is done, just take a break from church. And then I paused and said, but then I'm afraid I'll never go back. I was done, guys. I was totally done. So then he says, okay, so then how did this whole thing happen? And I told him about Thor, how Thor and I talked on the phone in like October 2018, something like that. And he just kind of whatever. Then I found out later his wife Bonnie found my resume and said, Thor, what are you doing? Call this guy. And then I get the call. They invite us out here in February. We meet everybody. Awesome people. We love the area. Back then it was affordable. And it was, just all of these different things that were just adding up for us that we just absolutely loved. And all of it just added up. And when we got done with the meeting, we were in the airport, we couldn't think of a reason not to come out here. And then, of course, obviously we're here. Why am I telling you this story? Because as I'm sharing this story with my friend, with this guy in Starbucks, I'm smiling. Like I'm just beaming. And at some point I start to feel it in my cheeks that I'm smiling so much. And then he asked me this question. He says, Josh, how many people do you know can say 1,000% they're doing exactly what God wants them to do and they're right where they want them to be? And I just started smiling. This is the point of following Jesus. He doesn't promise avoidance of the desert. He doesn't promise that we don't walk through the darkness, but he does promise to be the light. And if we follow him out of the darkness and into the light, like the beam of my smile, the Zoe, the life, the joy will be there. I don't know when. It's his timing. He's still sovereign. But if we follow Jesus into the light, through the nighttime desert and into the better place, we will be able to testify to the truth of the light of the world. Let's stand. Jesus, you are the light of the world.